Well, happy Election Day, November 5th, 2024, the day a lot of us in the news business have anxiously awaited, and a lot of voters already out there casting their votes. More than 2.4 million Illinoisans casting their vote early. We'll talk about the election coming up with the Center Square's Casey Harper out of Washington, D.C., but we've also got to tackle a couple of other things, including that report we talked about yesterday from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, estimating that they're going to see a $5 billion annual deficit by 2030. When you add all those deficits together, it's $22.2 billion. What does WirePoint's Ted Dabrowski think about that? I'll share a conversation I had with him. Also, the latest in the Madigan and McLean corruption trial up in Chicago. New audio released yesterday to the jury had Madigan saying that it's probably best he stay out of a plan to pay a former Madigan staffer $6,000 a month after he got released for sexual harassment. All as part of this effort by federal prosecutors to show that Madigan had a substantial amount of influence in politics here in the state of Illinois. So we'll tackle that as well. But coming up next, conversation with Casey Harper from the Center Square right here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Get the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every weekday morning here for Illinois in Focus Daily. Well, the closing arguments are in, and voters heading to the polls. Polls are open here in Illinois, and they are closing at 7 p.m. Of course, if you're still in line, you should be able to cast a ballot. But top of the ticket is who's going to be the next president of the United States. And to talk more about this, somebody who's been watching it closely over in Washington, D.C., is the Center Square's Casey Harper, joining us here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Casey, thanks for taking time with us this morning. First time on the show. Looking forward to touching base with you more throughout, as, of course, it's expected to be pretty tumultuous heading into a new Congress. But before we get there, we've got this election today. So tell us what the matchup is between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump.
Well, the matchup in a word, Greg, is close. In a second word, it's closer. I mean, this is one of the closest elections that we've seen. There's no denying that both campaigns are anxiously awaiting the results tonight. Of course, Americans across the country are heading to the ballot box. But interestingly, Greg, unlike past elections, over 75 million Americans have already voted. Now, this is reminiscent of COVID level numbers, but it wasn't surprising that so many people voted early, mail-in ballot, etc. during COVID for obvious reasons, a fear of infection, masking. There was a lot going on. This seems like a long ago, but it was only 4 years ago. So what we've seen, though, Greg, so that's so interesting, is 75 million votes. To put that in context, in 2020, former President Donald Trump, who of course is back on the ballot today, he received about 75 million votes in total. And, current President Joe Biden at the time received about 81 million votes. So today is historic, but unlike 2016 or 2012 before it, or 2008, we already have 75 million votes cast before today. So that's coming into this election. Of course, election day is important, but so much has already happened. It's just a new era of voting. With that being said, also speaking of the new era of voting, we've seen some demographic shifts, which we can talk more about. Trump is doing better with Black voters than Republicans ever do. And Harris is doing worse with Black voters than even someone like Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, who ran, of course, in 2016, a white woman, doing better with Black voters than Harris is, who, of course, would be the first Black female president. So that's an interesting thing. Also, Trump is doing better with Hispanic voters He's, the latest polling, it changes, of course, as polls do, and they have to be taken with a grain of salt. But he's doing about 45% with Hispanic voters, which is much better than, say, Mitt Romney did just a few years ago. So we've got these early voting has become such a huge part of these presidential campaigns, a confounding variable. We have demographic shifts. But then, all that being said, Greg, when you look at the swing states, the seven closest swing states, they're all within the margin of error, and it's really a toss-up heading into election night.
And obviously, all eyes are going to be on those swing states. Last night, you had Kamala Harris hit up, like 5 different spots in Pennsylvania. Trump kind of bounced around from some of the Carolinas to Pennsylvania, and I believe in Michigan as well. What are we seeing out of those swing states? Is it going to be a shift, or are things just so close that it's going to be a nail-biter and watching those poll numbers come after all the polls close?
Yeah, but it's the question, right? And if I had the perfect answer, I could be making a lot of money as a consultant right now. But I do think I have some insight, and it varies by state. Now, you might think, well, if people like Harris better, then she'll win all the states, or if people like Trump better, then he'll win all the states. But the thing is, the demographics within those states vary widely. And so, for instance, Trump is doing well in Arizona. It's one of the 7 closest swing states. He's up by about 2 points. Still pretty close, could go either way for sure. But that's one that a lot of people expect him to win. I think that that's been really influenced by the border issue, for instance, where people are very frustrated by the handling of the southern border. Some people blame Kamala Harris for that, for her role in the administration. And so she's taken flack for that. And then it goes back, Greg, to what we were discussing earlier with the Hispanic voters. Trump is doing unusually well with Hispanic voters. And so there's about a third of Arizona is Hispanic, I believe. So that's a huge win for him. And just keep in mind, the Republicans don't have to win these other demographics like black voters. They won't win black voters. They don't have to win Hispanic voters. They just have to make enough inroads to take away the huge margins that Democrats need to win. So if you turn to swing states with that in mind, like Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, rather, where Philadelphia is and has a large urban black population, I mean, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden all received, about 90 to 95% of the black vote. And that is huge in swing states like Pennsylvania with these large cities like, Pittsburgh and especially Philadelphia. If you look at Detroit, could swing the difference for the whole swing state of Michigan. And so, of course, in past elections, we talked a lot about suburban women, and those are really important. Harris is doing well with them. But I don't want to say the Trump card, but Trump's maybe ace in the hole could be if he pulls away these black voters in places like Philadelphia, like Detroit, although Michigan doesn't look too good for him right now. But, I think we've all learned to be humble about these polls in modern politics, Greg.
Well, there's no question, especially after 2016 and even all throughout 2020 and so on. But obviously, a lot of different topics may be pushing certain segments of voters one way or the other. But this has been pretty historic, Casey, about as far as the past 3 months, let alone the past 8 years with a former president assassination attempt, not one but two. You had the large Republican National Convention that was all about trying to counter Biden as the candidate, and then that Sunday afterwards, Biden drops out, Harris is selected, and it's just been really fascinating to see all this. But also on top of that, the persecution of the former president. Do you think that has added to this at all? And as far as what could be a possible poll shift amongst all demographics, is just how Trump has been characterized by the other side, by some in the corporate media. Will that play a role, you think?
It definitely will. It's a great point. I mean, we're really in a historic year. I would say since 2015, since Trump entered politics, every year has felt like an incredible news year with historic implications. The news cycle is moving 120 miles an hour. But this year, I mean, just to reiterate, 2 assassination attempts. We have indictments and court proceedings for the leading Republican candidate. We have, when you have a leading Republican candidate getting shot at and taken to court, and it's not even maybe the biggest news. The news stories only last, for 24 hours. I mean, that shows you where we are. We also have 2 overseas wars. We have the ongoing war in Ukraine. We also have what's going on with Israel and Gaza, which is really an Israeli-Iran war. with nuclear implications. And these kind of huge stories, there's so much crowding for attention that we can't even talk about them that long. But I think in many ways, the prosecution of Trump has helped him. I mean, if you remember back to the Republican primary, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was performing well against Trump and really had a chance of beating him. And then the FBI raided his home. And that, if you look at the polls and you look at the dates, that was the inflection point for the Trump campaign in the primary. That FBI raid was the end of DeSantis's Republican primary hopes. So in that sense, the FBI really gave Trump the Republican nomination, and that just continued every time he gets indicted. I mean, if you look, for instance, at Trump's fundraising numbers, every time the mugshot comes out or he gets indicted again, those are his biggest fundraising days. And so these legal proceedings have been huge for Trump in fundraising and painting himself as the martyr, because of course Trump's message is the system is rigged. They're coming for you, but they have to go through me first. And so every time they go for him, whether it's shooting at him and who's they, right? I mean, I understand that's a pretty big question, but every time he gets shot at or he gets indicted, he says, this is proof positive of what I've been telling you all along. The system's rigged and coming for me, and I'm the only thing standing in your way. So a lot of ways it reinforces his message. It's created a lot of problems for him, but big picture, I think it has helped him in a lot of ways.
Talking with Casey Harper with The Center Square, watching what's going on over in Washington, D.C. So while you go to thecentersquare.com and you check out the Illinois page, also click the home link there because you'll be able to see the national stories as well. Casey, obviously, the issues here, Trump and Harris trying to differentiate themselves on economic issues, on foreign policy issues, on domestic issues. But ultimately, they're just going to be somebody in the executive branch who has to execute the laws that Congress makes. Let's just focus here and wrap things up. Congress, what's going to happen there? Obviously, you've got a House that's narrowly controlled by Republicans and a Senate that's narrowly controlled by Democrats. Is it going to be the same when we get out of the wash here, or is one side gonna get on top of the other?
I think what's most likely, and again, big grain of salt, I think what's most likely is a flip. Democrats have a very tough battle in the Senate right now. They're defending a lot of seats. They're defending basically twice as many seats as Republicans are defending. I think we have about 10 Republican senator seats that are up for election. And then I think there's 19 Democratic seats that are up. But then there's another 4 seats that are independents that lean Democratic. So people like Kyrsten Sinema or Bernie Sanders, not technically Democrats, but everyone knows they vote to the left and they're valuable to the Democratic Party. So that puts it at about 23 Democrats who are, fighting for their lives versus 9 Republicans. And then within those, there are 7 toss-up races, and only one of them is Republican. And then John Tester in Montana is losing his race. Anything can happen, but it's not a pretty picture for Democrats in the Senate. And the House, they're doing much better. They have a good chance. I'd say a slightly better chance than Republicans to hold the House. Those races are really influenced by turnout, though, in the presidential election. So it could be a House member, or the same for Trump.
Casey Harper with The Center Square. We'll be watching your reports all throughout the day today and into the evening. It's going to be a long night for all of us at The Center Square. So I greatly appreciate you taking the time with us this morning.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, it is Illinois in Focus Daily. I want to again thank Casey Harper for joining me. We will be talking with him again in the near future. And be sure to get all of the newsletters from thecentersquare.com. All right, and subscribe, hit that notification bell here for Illinois in Focus Daily, and get the podcast anywhere you get podcasts with America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop, and appreciate you guys being here on Election Day.
That way you just have a little cash in your pocket.
Yeah.
And what you have to do is like falling off a ladder. You wouldn't have any trouble doing that. So
I'll do whatever. I'm not above doing anything. So.
Well,
Or do you want me to talk to Marty? I mean, whatever you want.
yeah, I think I ought to stay out of it. That's
Okay.
what I think.
It's former state representative Mike McLean talking with former House Speaker Michael Madigan, staffer Kevin Quinn, and then Madigan in a separate call talking about how he really shouldn't have any part to do with this plan to pool money together to pay Kevin Quinn after he was fired from Madigan's political operation following sexual harassment allegations. Holy cow. The latest audio out of the trial against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and his co-defendant Michael McLean. They're charged with 23 counts of bribery, racketeering, and other federal charges for what federal prosecutors called Madigan Enterprise, a nearly decade-long scheme to benefit Madigan using his public office, the favorable legislation for Commonwealth Edison. Welcome back, Illinois in Focus Daily. Of course, this trial against Madigan, long time coming, and it's been going on now for weeks. And we get the latest yesterday with Will Kusenow, former Madigan staffer, on the stand, wrapping things up after he went on the stand last week. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday he was on the stand. So Monday he gets on there, finishes up his testimony, and then they bring on some others to provide testimony. And one particular storyline that came up quite a bit was the storyline of Kevin Quinn. And being a former Madigan staffer within his local political operation, being accused of sexual harassment by another political staffer. And while the jury in the case didn't get to hear about the reasons why Quinn was let go from Madigan's operation, they knew that he was let go from Madigan's operation. And they ended up airing some of these tapes about getting money to Quinn. But before we get there, let's get to the crux of some of the things that are being alleged by prosecutors about these contracts that Madigan allies would get in exchange for getting favorable legislation through the General Assembly that favors Commonwealth Edison. Flashback to last year, the ComEd 4 trial, which McLean was a part of. It included Ann Primagiori, who is a former ComEd official, and 2 lobbyists associated with ComEd. Well, in a phone call that Madigan had with McLean about Ann Primagiori's plane, kind of revealing here in the talk that they were having about how classy of a plane Ann had.
So, Mike, in your later life, you may want to think of working for a power company, because the plane that Ann Primagiori arrived in, you could carry the President of the United States in the thing.
Well, it was kind of a nice thing. I mean, Ann called up and said to Chris Crane, "I'd like to go to the funeral and take one of the planes." And Chris says, "You take blah, blah, blah plane," whatever that plane is, which is the big one in the fleet. And so it was very nice of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Sure.
Probably a waste of a lot of money for all that plane for one person, but
I guess they're showing a profit.
I think they're doing okay. So, but it was nice of her to come too. So it was, that one trip to Turkey developed a real nice relationship between you and her, and always made me feel good.
Yep, sure.
And then you guys were always good to Jack during the conventions, and so now their son Jack wants to. I mean, he wants to help in politics. He wants to run for office. It's amazing how the ripple effect of what a nice gesture does.
Sure.
And then how it just kind of has a domino effect.
Interesting to kind of lift the curtain a bit to hear some of that. But again, some new audio revealed yesterday in court highlights this plan to pool money together for Kevin Quinn, the brother of Marty Quinn, a Chicago alderman who Kevin Quinn was working for Madigan in his political operations, and several years ago at the peak of the Me Too movement, a political staffer alleged that Quinn was harassing her with unwanted approaches and texts and a variety of other things. And she even went to the office and complained about it and didn't really feel much was being done. And then all of a sudden it boiled over. Quinn was let go. But you had a loyal Madigan staffer let go. What do you do now? Is he going to be able to get any kind of income? Well, McClain ended up talking with Quinn about what he's setting up, getting several people to pool $1,000 each to give to Quinn.
Well, while we're looking for a job for you, I thought maybe I'd get a few guys together and try to give you a bridge of some money. So it would be a consultant contract with some, like three or four or five people.
Okay.
It gets you $5 or $6 grand a month that you don't have now, and it would be like a 6-month contract, and then hopefully during that 6 months you can land somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm making calls now, and so here's my thought. See what you think. So here's my thought that because I don't know if they'll write it off on their business or not. I just don't know that. But it would be a written contract, where you would promise to do some research for them.
Okay.
And at the end of the 6 months, you'd give them that paper.
So, again, it kind of sounds like,
you got to tell me the number.
All you got to do is just put some things together on a piece of paper and send that off to whoever's giving you $1,000 a month. It could be the same paper for this person, that person, and the other. And the prosecutors even showed some of these papers that Quinn would produce and the contracts that were produced to give them $1,000 each, up to $6,000. And here's more of that conversation.
Well, thank you.
So they just give you a bridge,
Yeah.
And so it'll probably take us. So I'd start September 15th and go for 6 months.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
That way you just have a little cash in your pocket.
Yeah.
And the what you have to do is like falling off a ladder. You wouldn't have any trouble doing that. So
I'll do whatever. I'm not above doing anything.
So falling up a ladder, you could do that, right? And it's kind of just, again, fascinating. Hey, we're going to set this up. 6 people are going to give you $1,000. All you got to do is give them this, report, and you can give the same report to 6 different people, and there you go. You got a contract with $6,000 a month. Well, McClain then brought at least some of the idea to Madigan in a wiretapped phone call that prosecutors revealed yesterday.
Hi, Speaker.
Yeah, Mike, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
You have a minute?
Yeah, sure.
So, Speaker, I put 4 or 5 people together that are willing to contribute to help a monthly thing for the next 6 months, like I mentioned to you, for Kevin Quinn.
Yeah.
So I'm prepared to talk to Kevin about it now, but I didn't know if you wanted to mention it to Marty, or if you want to stay out of it, or...
Well,
or do you want me to talk to Marty? I mean, whatever you want.
Yeah, I think I ought to stay out of it. That's
Okay.
what I think.
Okay. All right. I'll take care of it.
You ought to stay out of it, was his thinking. But again, something that federal prosecutors aired yesterday for the jury. They're back at it again today, even if it's election day. Yes, jury's going to be in. They're going to start court at 11. The judge gave them the morning off so that they could get their votes in. And then they got to go right back to the jury box to hear more evidence against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and Mike McClain, co-defendant in U.S. v. Madigan et al. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Thank you so much for being here each and every weekday morning. Get the podcast where you get podcasts. Just search Illinois in Focus and get the headlines at thecentersquare.com.
I have talked about the need for efficiencies, the need to make sure that you're not, haven't put your ARPA dollars entirely into your operating budget. We tried not to do that at the state level. We also have, tight budgets, and we'll continue to.
But here we are. What's interesting about this whole thing is we were having these crises 2019. We're back to them a few years later because all the COVID windfall revenues are gone. And people hear it all the time. It's just more of the same, where the budget spending keeps going up and up and up, and taxpayers are forced to pay more and more and more.
Separately, that was Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and WirePoint's president, Ted Dabrowski, talking about the state's financial condition. Welcome back, Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop, and yesterday we talked about this document from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, where it talks about how the state is expecting to have a $5 billion annual deficit by 2030. And it gives several recommendations on investing in education and economic development, and more spending here, more spending there, and maybe some efficiencies. But again, when you look at this document that comes from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, you can see all of the different spending levels and the resources that they're going to be collecting in taxation from 2025 through 2030. And you've got the overall spending expected to be upwards to $63 billion by 2030. Keep in mind, that's $10 billion more than what is being spent in the current fiscal year. Total expenditures in this current year, $53.2 billion. By 2030, they're estimating it's going to increase by $10 billion. It's $63 billion. Now, what about the deficits? The general fund surplus versus deficits? Well, next year we'll have a nearly $3 billion deficit, and it grows from there all the way up to $5 billion the last 3 years of this 5-year forecast, with the ongoing costs increasing. Education, human services, public safety, and so on. Now, Governor J.B. Pritzker last week, before this report came out from his Office of Management and Budget, he was asked about Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's dire straits for the city of Chicago just before Johnson gave his budget address, where he urged for a $300 million property tax increase. Well, Pritzker gave some of his budgeting philosophy when he was asked about the prospect of a property tax increase.
I have talked about the need for efficiencies, the need to make sure that you're not, haven't put your ARPA dollars entirely into your operating budget. And I don't know what the percentage is for the city rather, but it's a reasonably high percentage. And so that obviously causes problems. We tried not to do that at the state level. We also have, tight budgets. And we'll continue to.
So the governor went on to talk about how difficult it was to budget heading into the COVID-19 pandemic.
Just to go back to a day when it was really hard during my term in office, was when the pandemic hit, and we were in the spring of 2020 and putting forward our FY21 budget. We had a budget. We passed, and then going into FY21, it seemed clear that we need to make cuts at that point because, revenues were falling off a cliff, and we didn't have what ended up being the American Rescue Plan Act. And so we found $700 million of cuts to make it. I mean, that is not easy. I'm not suggesting anybody wants to do that, but we did it. We did it without laying people off. But we did it, and I know I don't want to see anybody laid off. There are lots of solutions to these problems that need to be brought to the fore.
So again, the governor talking about how they were heading into the COVID pandemic, saw the revenues were dropping off, and then it was before they had the American Rescue Plan Act. Federal tax funds, your tax dollars going to Congress in Washington, D.C., coming back to states. Illinois took in $33.3 billion, according to federal pandemic oversight operations. I believe it's pandemicoversight.gov. You can go in and look at Illinois and how much they got. It's $33.3 billion. What's been fascinating about this is the governor and even the comptroller have pushed back on the idea that Illinois' finances were only good because of the COVID money that was received by the federal government. And Republicans, for the past several years, talking about the budget, the increase in spending, because it has increased in spending for every year that Pritzker's been in office. They talk about the COVID dollars drying up, and we really shouldn't have these increased spending habits if the COVID dollars are going to dry up soon. And then you had all the conversation about non-citizen migrants getting more than $1 billion in housing, food, legal assistance, and even taxpayer-subsidized health insurance for non-citizen migrants in the state of Illinois. Again, $1 billion plus, if not even more, especially as the problem continues and the crisis continues with tens of thousands of non-citizen migrants in the state of Illinois alone. But regardless, the governor and other leading Democrats would push back on Republicans and saying, no, COVID dollars had nothing to do with our fiscal prowess. Well, here we are now looking at, again, the governor's office of management and budget saying, hey, over the next 5 years, we are going to have billions in deficits. And the total coming up to around, $22.2 billion worth of deficits in all 5 years combined. I connected with WirePoint's president, Ted Dabrowski. He analyzes these numbers, and he got his hands on this report that was released late Friday and shared some of his initial thoughts.
Well, we got a big surprise the other day from Governor Pritzker and his OMB, his Office of Management and Budget team. Surprise, they're saying they're going to have a $3 billion deficit next year, a $4 billion plus deficit the following year, and then $5 billion deficits the 3 years after that. And it was quite shocking to me for a governor that's been very emphatic about the job he's done at the state level, on the balanced budgets, on the improvement in credit ratings, to where we today have an economy that's, let's say, much more functional than it was during COVID, and interest rates are going down. So big surprise, and I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure if that's a signal that we need massive tax hikes again, or whether we're going to have to see massive cuts because people can't put up with it anymore.
So in talking with Ted, again, this is a conversation I had with him yesterday, we looked at some of the spending, and the increased spending is across the board when it comes to education, when it comes to public safety. Human Services sees a pretty substantial increase in the amount of spending for taxpayers. And again, just to look at this, let's go to Human Services. 11.5 billion this year, 12 billion the next year, 12.5, 13 billion, 13.5 billion, 14.1 billion. You've got healthcare increasing from 8.9 billion to 11.5 billion. Government services altogether, that's increasing from 4.8 to 5.7. So increased spending, including education, 13.5 up to 15.8. The spending continues. More from Dabrowski.
It is phenomenal. First, we have to understand that the budget today is huge compared to what it was before COVID. We had a $40 billion budget right before COVID. It's at $53 billion the current year, so that's already a massive increase. You're talking about $13 billion more dollars. Where did the money go? And we know where a lot of it went, but suddenly we're back into deficits again. And they want to take that $53 billion spending and make it $63 billion by 2030. So you're talking about, again, more and more. They call it investments. I call it, massive waste of spending in education. Not because education isn't worthy of spending, it's because it does nothing for results. We can talk about that briefly. Massive increases in human services, of course, more to pensions, and it just doesn't seem to stop. And I think, the bottom line is Governor Pritzker took, and of course the legislature took, all that COVID windfall tax revenues, and they've just shoved it into programmatic spending, and it won't stop now. And they have no way to stop it. So spending goes up over the next 5 years by 10 billion, whereas revenues only go up by 5. And that's how you end up with all these $5 billion deficits each year.
And we also reviewed some of the policy objectives that are in this GOMB budget, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. And it talks about increased spending for education, investments, they call it, saving for the future in the Budget Stabilization Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, increasing that spending as well. They say that they want to aim at reducing debt obligations and saving on interest costs. They also outline how they want to continue the reduction of unpaid bills and spending on that. Economic development investments, spending on that type of thing, like having a closing fund, for instance, the governor controls to bring businesses to Illinois, and then also spending controls. Here they talk about the governor implementing spending controls in a number of areas with new efficiencies, and believes the people of Illinois expect high-quality programs and services, as well as the most efficient and effective use of their tax dollars. So clearly, some policy objectives that Gombe puts out there, but Dabrowski says it's really not going to do much.
I don't, and I'll tell you why, because this is just, again, and people hear it all the time, it's just more of the same, where the budget spending keeps going up and up and up, and taxpayers are forced to pay more and more and more. We've seen it through property taxes. We've seen it through all kinds of taxes and fees. And, you can see the outmigration as a result of that, at least, contributes to that. What I do think the big takeaway, I think, will be is that Governor Pritzker will say, look, we need to spend $63 billion. He's going to say that. And either we raise taxes to do it. We're $5 billion short in those last 3 years, $5 billion short a year. Or we're going to have to do massive cuts, and he's going to threaten about the cuts like we always hear. We're going to have to cut education, we have to cut football and band and music. We'll hear stuff like that, and it's going to hurt people. But I think the real story is that we keep hurting people with these tax hikes and service cuts that we've seen already. So I think it's just going to be a big warning, like we saw before. We saw that when the progressive tax failed. He warned that he's going to have to slash things, and COVID came along and changed that whole dynamic. But here we are. What's interesting about this whole thing is we were having these crises 2019. We're back to them a few years later because all the COVID windfall revenues are gone.
And again, in talking with Dabrowski, it was yesterday, and we kind of looked at what's happening today. Today, you've got 3 non-binding questions Illinois voters are going to sound off on. One of them says, hey, we're going to propose to you a 3% surcharge on millionaires to fund property tax relief. But will voters know about the state's finances before they go into the polls? Yeah,
so it's a non-binding referendum, so maybe fewer people will know about it. But the people who do, it'll be curious. They won't know about this stuff that we're talking about. It came out, just Friday night. So, and of course, all the people that early voted had no chance to even consider it. But I have to wonder, that 2020 progressive tax failed. It should have passed because, Governor Pritzker promised 97% of Illinoisans a small tax cut, and he would go after the 3% richest. And it's funny because that should have passed like with a slam dunk, and it didn't. People rejected it. So people are very distrustful of, I think, of the taxing policy of our state. Let's see what happens tomorrow. Maybe the fact that it's non-binding carries a little less weight, but let's see if people are skeptical again, as they should be.
Obviously, the state's finances could play a lot into that, but we've also heard that this non-binding question could turn into a proposed constitutional amendment in 2 years. What are the prospects of the state's finances playing a role into that, looking into the future?
I mean, here, what they're going to do is, politicians and Governor Pritzker will look at the results of the referendum and see, what they're trying to do is, that referendum is again questioned very well. We'll tax the rich so that we can give everybody else property tax relief. Again, the way that's worded, it's tricky because you don't really know if they'll ever give property tax relief. But it's worded in a way to get the voters to come out and vote for it. We'll see if it's rejected again. That's egg on his face. And if it's not rejected, they're going to try to use that as there's a sweetener, and they're a really good sweetener because people are fed up with property taxes, of course.
And some final words from Ted Dabrowski, president of WirePoints, in the conversation I had with him yesterday.
No, the only thing I'd add to that is that this whole tax increase in progressive tax and millionaires tax kind of just really goes counter to the most recent data we saw that 93,000 people left the state on net last year due to all kinds of reasons, and so more tax hikes can't be anything but a people chaser.
Again, thanks to Ted Dabrowski for letting me chat with him yesterday. We also talked more about the tax competitiveness issue. May air that a little bit later on, looking at the Tax Foundation's recent reports on Illinois. It is Illinois in Focus Daily, every morning with you. Wake up, be sure to get the subscription with America's Talking Network here on YouTube, get the podcast anywhere you get podcasts, and get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. All right, that's all I got for you guys today on this election day. I'm going to go take a few hours off. It's going to be a long night for us with the center squares. We watch what happens here in Illinois. Also, what's going on with the race for Congress and president. Be sure to go to thecentersquare.com, not just the Illinois page, but also the national page, where you'll be able to follow along. Get the newsletter, see all the great reporting from the team at thecentersquare.com, and join us each and every weekday morning for Illinois in Focus, where we'll hook you up with stuff you need to know after the election. So we'll do some cleanup tomorrow, look at all of the outcomes that we have here in Illinois. Everything from, the presidential election to the non-binding questions statewide, and also some of those interesting questions that are on some local ballots, like should the state split into two, or should tax dollars be used for illegal immigrants, or should there be property tax or sales tax increases? A whole host of things going on all around Illinois. Polls are open until 7 o'clock tonight. And there's also plenty of opportunity for you to report any concerns you may have. Find those local phone numbers for your election officials. The Attorney General also has some phone numbers for Northern and Southern Illinois. And even the FBI has some contact numbers people can report questionable activities all around Election Day 2024. We're almost through it. Have yourselves a great day. Don't forget to vote. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning with Illinois in Focus Daily.